Firstly, use the same coloured thread to fasten the neckline to the canvas on the forepart. Fold the lapel carefully across the break line and at the top iron a crease into it. We should also chalk on at the shoulder and centre back the border of the collar. Line the centre seam of the melton up to the back seam, and lining the raw edge of the melton and canvas to the mark stitches, or chalk showing the neckline. Keep the lining out of the way. Decide which side you'll begin basting, and on the opposite side, moor some basting thread. Carry on then to your desired side. Use the slip stitch and make sure you're stitching the collar fully to the inlay beyond the mark stitches. Sew it across, keeping the bottom of the stand lined up to the back neck mark stitches. When we get to the shoulder seam, just before we cross it, tack the stitch. We are going to stitch back towards the centre back and then secure the other side in the same way. Tack the thread on the other shoulder as well and stitch back towards the centre back to fasten off the baste. Lay the first jacket front flat. Place the collar into position such that the break line of the collar matches the break line of the lapel. Avoid sewing through the canvas here, not super important but kinda nice to have it mostly separate from here. Continue basting. It'll only be a few stitches, no further than the mark stitches of the neckline. Tack the collar down there and again stitch back to the shoulder. Fold the collar over its break line, and it's better if we have the front on a board with the shoulder and rest of the jacket draping off of the edge. Fold the lapel over the collar. We want the collar to lay flat and happy. We are going to stitch the jacket canvas and such sticking out from the lapel to the collar. Stitch it very securely because we don't want it to move while we're shaping it. It is very important that the whole lapel is properly folded on the break line to the break point so that we can confirm that it is held in place properly. Check that it is in fact in the correct place. Do the same on the other side and check that they're the same. I suggest measuring the distance between the tip of the lapel and the shoulder line to make sure that they are the correct height, or the same height, and we'll do similar when we shape the lapel. At this point, before securing the collar, we should check the jacket. Put it on a stand, mannequin or hanger to make sure that the lapels fold how we want them, and that they do break at the break point. If they do not, then we need to readjust how the collar is secured to the top of the lapel. Once it's in a good place though, then we can start securing the collar to the jacket. We want to trim the canvas and the fabric around the neck on the collar. Especially around the back, we don't want anything sticking up over the collar's break line. If possible, we can also trim the layer of chest canvas in there between the demet and the body canvas, trimming it back another ½ centimeter. Around the back neck, at the top of the facing, we can trim the canvas sticking out there into a curve so that it's not pointy. We may also need to snip into the top of the stay we put across the back neck and possibly the fabric as well, to keep it from being too tight across the neck. You can see I trimmed the silicea we put in so that it's below the collar's neck break line. Use the melton coloured thread and we'll fasten it. Start at the fronts. Begin to slip stitch and fasten the canvas above the lapel. Go back and forth once each or more at your discretion. Just make sure it's stuck there. We still don't want any big stitches on the melton. Definitely sew to the collar canvas and catch a pinprick of the melton at most. Progress to the end of the collar, just simply securing it across to the other side, securing the other side as securely as the first. What can be important to do is to make sure around the top of the facing and shoulder seam that the jacket is properly opened up and nothing bunches on top of anything. Specifically as we're sewing down the top of the canvas next to the facing, and when we go from the canvas to slip stitching the neck inlay and its stay to the collar. Lay the collar flat to mark the shape of the collar. Start at the center back and measure further than the length of the stand so that the fall will cover the whole of the stand. So with our 3 cm stand we can measure at least 3.5 or 4 cm. Make a straight line from the shoulder to the collar and measure that about ½ centimeter more than what you chose from the back. You can join that line by eye or use the collar pattern we made and copy off the top edge. At the lapel, I think it's best to create two sides of an equilateral triangle. Measure the lapel from the tip to where the notch is. Measure that up from the tip onto the canvas, and then from the notch to where that point overlaps the other point. Do the maths, as my maths teacher would say. If we had a compass or a small protractor, then that would be easier. I need to keep retrying it, and with all the overlapping chalk I use a ballpoint pen to make where I want the tip of the collar and draw the line to the notch where the facing seam ends. We can then join up our points across the collar to create the shape that we'll cut along. Again, we can use our collar pattern to trace it. We can use a sharp chalk or a pen or pencil for this. We can do both sides and try to keep them the same, but we're going to cut one side and then trace it for the second. Ideally, we want to put the jacket on a stand and make sure that it is in fact even. Have a good look and make sure that it looks the way you want it to. We can measure the distance from the points to the shoulder line as a control as well. Personally, I want to secure the canvas on the lapel to the collar more. One last thing to make certain of is that the fall completely covers the stand of the collar. Hold down the fall at the line that we want to cut it across and pull up the excess to check that the stand is hidden. If not, then obviously you need to extend the fall so that it does. Once we're happy, we'll cut along the line that we like just from the inlay through the tip of the notch across to the centre back, to just past the centre back. We want to fold the fall over the centre back to line up the lapels so that we can cut both sides the same. Use a pin to make sure the lapels and the slant are lined up. We also want to use a pin to make sure both sides of the brake line are level. We can put a pin through the stitching to make sure it goes through the stitching on the other side. Then we can continue cutting across the fall following the cut we already made, and we can discard the piece we cut off. Somehow mine is still a little off from the tip of my collar, so I'm trimming that tiny amount down. We can cut down the lines we drew to the notch of the lapel. Turn the collar over Melton side up. From the notch, chalk directly down the jacket. Measure 2 centimeters, or however much you like, you have under the lapel, and use that as a start point to curve the collar back towards the neck, curving back into the stand as you get to the shoulder. Although you could do this with an more angular shape. Cut down that line to the 2 centimeter point, then cut away the excess as well. Do the same to the second side, but you might like to use the piece from the first to keep them the same or very similar anyway. Again, we can do another check on a stand or a hanger to make sure that it looks the way we want it to. Again, I'm trying to increase how secure the collar is. I want to trim away a tiny amount of the collar canvas underneath the Melton, only where it touches the jacket cloth, so down the 2 centimeter straight and across the shoulder seam and across the back. This is so that it isn't visible after we finish the collar. I already cut away the basting holding the undercollar to the lapel, and you want to remove it before putting on the top collar. With the piece of cloth we set aside for the collar, open it up and press one edge under a centimeter, or even a little bit less. What we can also do is fold it long ways and stretch the raw and folded edge. Don't crease it where it's folded over this time though. Stretching it will make it easier to apply, so I don't really know why I skipped it. Find about the center of the top collar to place that to the center of the undercollar. Slip the centimeter that you folded over into the collar between the canvas and the Melton. Starting from the center, baste the fabric onto the collar right along the edge to the tip of the collar. You want to not catch the Melton when doing this first baste. Again, this is why we left a centimeter from the edge when padding the undercollar. If we didn't do that, then we could either cut the centimeter that we folded back a little bit, or cut the padding. Cut the stitching if it's dense enough, and there are ideally about 3 rows over on the fall. It's important that the canvas is right up in the crease of the top collar, otherwise we're stuck with a little bit of unstructured fabric flapping about on our collar. We do not want the collar perking up, so approaching the tip we ought to pull a little bit of ease into the collar. Do the same for both sides. The second baste I want to do is practically on top of the first, but this time sewing through the Melton as well. We're doing all of these starting from about the middle and sewing towards the edge, both sides in the same way. Cleaning out from the previous baste, the next line of basting will be towards the break line, but about 1 centimeter from it, but still on the fall of the collar. Hold the collar flat and make sure the cloth and the canvas are smoothed together from the middle towards the lapel. End this baste at least 1 centimeter from the gorge line, and at the tip again we should give it a small amount of ease, not cleaning it as much. Only a small amount of extra cloth that can be pressed in later, which will be pressed flat later. Fold the collar on the break line and try to lay the rest of the break line flat with it. We will do another baste about 1 centimeter from the break line on the inside of the jacket, on the stand now. We need to smooth the cloth over the canvas still. We'll be rolling the cloth over the break line, but it's very important that we aren't rolling the break line anywhere other than where it's meant to be. This is easier when the entire break line and the lapel are folded from the center back to the break point. Again, we need to end this stitch at least 1 centimeter from the gorge line. Lay the collars flat and feel through the collar fabric to mark on the gorge line. Mark straight across the back to the other gorge line as well. Give the gorge line a centimeter seam allowance and cut away the excess. We can keep some of the excess at the tips though. Fold the seam allowance under itself and baste it in place, touching the facing with some ease, such that the collar can still be folded. We can keep it flat or fold the lapel as it's supposed to sit as we baste it down. Either way, we don't fold the fabric and push or pull it to fit the gorge line. Make the fold so that it touches the gorge line. We do not want it to pull. To check, just fold it over of course, and if the seam is gaping open at all, then you'll just need to loosen it. We might have done it earlier, but we can snip into the collar fabric across the back because it might become too tight. Less if we stretched it earlier, but still tight nonetheless. Not too high though, we want them lower than where the back stitch is going to be. Use your Melton coloured thread to backstitch on the neckline between the gorge lines. Make the stitch below where the lining will be, but higher than the undercollar. You want to catch through the collar canvas, but you don't want anything too visible on the Melton. Again, Melton side up, fold away the triangle-ish shape at the edges of the collar. Trim off any overlapping bits, but keep the two folded seam allowances. Hold it slightly curved inwards so that it doesn't perk up. Baste it in place so that it doesn't show under the collar. Don't cut away too much or any of the excess yet. We'll cut it later so that we can sew along a seam that hasn't spent however much time fraying. Then just lay it flat, melt inside up, and iron the fall of the collar, preferably not ironing on the break line. About here is where I actually trimmed the collar canvas out from under the Melton. Positioning the centre back of the lining up to the centre of the collar at an appropriate height. Changing the seam allowance of the lining to make sure you have enough lining or excess cloth down the centre back. We can't have the lining pull, but we also don't want too much. We also don't want the lining to be too close to the top of the collar stand. At least 1–1.5 centimeters from the top, but also above the seam between the top collar and the facing. I suggest using pins to walk the lining towards each shoulder, making sure that it isn't tight at all. We can fold the seam allowances over as we go, and we can confirm that the lining won't pull on the jacket. As we pin across the shoulder, make sure there's enough ease over it as well. There's a centimeter of ease over the shoulder of the fabric, so we need to add that to the lining on the inside as well. When we have both shoulders in place, we can start a continuous baste from one side to the other. We should tack at either side of the shoulder, and we can baste the back lining straight onto the shoulder pad. From a logistical standpoint, I suggest against knotting the thread when starting from the armhole side, because we're going to put a sleeve lining over it, and if it's knotted we can't pull out that basting at all, and either way we'd have a knot of thread in there. Let's check that it doesn't pull, and we can move on.